Hello there. My name is Alex, and I am one of the hosts of the Fix series of podcasts. That's FYX. We have a weekly podcast called Gaming Fix, which is all about stuff we've been playing, the industry at large, as well as kind of diving into other things we're interested in, like anime, comics, movies, whatever. And I also host our other podcast, Coding Fix, which is all about software development, how to code, what it's like to work as a professional developer, things like that. But I'm not here to talk about either of those shows right now. What I'm here to talk about is kind of following up on a thread I had posted to the podcasting subreddit just a little over a week ago. So I had mentioned that we had hit our 150th episode, and that was on Gaming Fix, so yay. And just kind of sharing some of the thoughts that over the past 3 years that we've accumulated, just lessons we've learned, failures we've had, hopefully helping other people kind of avoid some of the pitfalls that we'd run into over the years. And the feedback from this thread was awesome. We got lots of comments and just a lot of DMs and a few emails. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who reached out. Really appreciated. You had good feedback and had some really great questions. And there was a resounding question that lots of people kind of wanted to hear more about. And that relates to thought number 4 here, which was about respecting your listeners' ears. There we go. Which was about having the best audio quality that you can. And I had made this little point down here of, if anyone's interested in a tutorial for how to set this up, I could do a walkthrough of our setup someday. Just please let me know. Well, that's what I'm here for today, is to kind of walk you through our setup and just have some general advice to have the best audio quality you can have. So let's dive right in. So firstly, our podcasts are 100% remote. All of us live all over the world. I live in Canada. Some of our folks live in the States, Japan, the UK. We've had guests from all over. And that means we have to rely on a digital platform for recording everything. Now, when we were starting 3 years ago, we tried a bunch of different ones. We tried Hangouts, we tried Discord, I think we tried Skype for a little while, and they always had compromises. We had to either say, okay, this one, the audio is pretty good, but the video's bad because we like to see each other's faces when we're speaking. Or this one's video is awesome, but the audio is terrible. Or like this one's latency is bad, so like we're talking over each other all the time. We found that Zoom, I think it was like the 4th or 5th one we tried, so probably about 2.5 years ago. Yeah, we started using Zoom and found that it is the best balance between audio quality, video quality, and latency for us. So we recommend Zoom for podcasters. It's kind of had an interesting year in 2020. It's gotten a big kind of surge of popularity. And I think everyone's kind of more or less familiar with Zoom these days. And it does have, occasional trade-offs, but overall, pretty good. Now, what we used to do is, I'm going to pull OBS, which is how I'm recording this. What we used to do is just record everything. And we still record everything. And we also stream everything because we like having our stuff out there. But what we would do is we would record everything, and you can see it's picking up my voice here. And we would extract that audio, like we would separate that audio out, and then that would be our podcast. We would just kind of record everything out of Zoom and put that straight onto the internet. That was our episode. And honestly, it was okay, for an amateur podcast for the first 6 months, 7 months, whatever it was that we did that. It sounded acceptable. It wasn't great. It wasn't professional, but it sounded fine. It's what we needed. But I'm the editor and kept running into issues. For one, the sound quality was fine, but it wasn't great. But the other one that was more important was, let's say something really funny happened in your podcast episode, or something really informative that you want to turn into a clip. If one of your podcasters in the background, like their partner or something, dropped a glass and it shattered and it was really noisy, and it happened right in the middle of the spot where you want to make a clip out of, then if you're just recording the one piece of audio out of Zoom, this one, then you can't remove that. If you try to, you're pulling out of, everybody's voices. If you try to cut that out, then everything moves around and jostles and sounds just weird. So that became an issue because we do clips. We also like to have just discrete control over all of our voices in case, someone's cat jumps up and hits the microphone. We can just pull that part out rather than having to affect all of the audio. And the way to do that is to, well, have discrete versions of all of our audio. So if you see here, we have Alex, we have Pat. This is our guide track. This is what comes out of here, the recording. And, Allison, Andre, Erica, Sam, and guests, blah, 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 blah. I should say, this is not meant to be a tutorial on how to use these kinds of programs. I use Cubase. If you're looking for a free alternative, there is one called Reaper. It's wonderful and has pretty much the same functionality, just a different interface. But again, this isn't meant to just be a tutorial on how to use these. This is just the tool we use. Anyways, so this is our original guide track. And, honestly, it sounds fine. Like if I were to, let's just solo it. So we're only listening to it. And I don't know, let's just go somewhere random here.
Yeah. I could see that.
Yeah.
Especially with like people's reactions to the.
Sounds all right. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to move this around a little bit. I'm going to take that off and let's go right back to where we were.
Wow. Recently, it seems like it's not really hitting it for people, but I might be wrong.
About the story because they're like just pissed in general about the game because the thing they like isn't.
So it sounds way better. And again, I'm just going to switch it over to the other one.
Isn't there. So then they'll complain about the whole package.
Yeah. So it sounds significantly better using these discrete tracks. There's reasons for that. I am doing some post-processing to make them sound even better. We'll get there. But first, we need to talk about how do we get those tracks there in the first place. We use a tool called Audacity, and it is one that I would recommend. It works on Windows. It works on Mac. I think it works on Linux. I haven't tried the Linux version in a few years, but let's say it does. And it is just a really good open source free way to record your individual audio on your individual computer. It works with anything. If all you have is access to your laptop mic or like a webcam, that's fine. Like you can see here, these are my inputs. I do have a microphone from HD Pro webcam C920 if I wanted to use it. I use a nice XLR mic. The rest of the crew uses Blue Yetis, and honestly, they sound really nice. So if you're looking to invest in a microphone but don't want to spend too much money, Blue Yetis definitely get a recommendation from us. And it works through USB. You can also get XLR microphones. Not going to get into the differences right now. All you really need to care about is using Audacity to record your own audio. I use one step in between, which is Voicemeeter. And I use Voicemeeter Banana because I also do other stuff. The more basic versions of Voicemeeter just have one of these tracks rather than 2 and 3. But I use all of them. I'm just going to move this to the center of the screen. So you'll see that as I'm speaking, my voice is bouncing around up here. It's going to be a little bit delayed from when you're actually hearing my voice, maybe. I actually don't know. I haven't watched the playback yet. But either way, you'll see that it's bouncing around, but I get this little added benefit here of these controls here. So I have a dedicated mute button. If you've ever recorded a podcast and have thought, okay, I need to mute for a second. There's some background noise happening, or I really need to cough or something like that. Then you either need to mute in the Zoom call or whatever you're using. But if you're recording locally, muting the Zoom call doesn't mute the recording, so it'll still end up in the recording, which isn't great. Or you need to push a little button on your microphone or something that mutes it, and that makes a little clicking sound. So also not 100% ideal, but by using Voicemeeter, I'm able to just have this button and keep an eye on my signal here. So I'm able to speak and you can't hear it. And that's great. That means I have just a dedicated mute button that works anytime. Also, it gives me more discrete control. I am able to boost my microphone just a little bit. You'll see it's at 3.1 versus these ones, which are a little lower, and this one's at 0. These are all decibels. Won't dive too deep into what decibels mean, but it just means my microphone is a little higher than 0, so I can boost it a little bit without distorting it. So yes, I recommend Voicemeeter if you want to get that granular. You don't need to. But I definitely recommend Audacity, though again, Voicemeeter has this handy dandy mute button, which is just wonderful. Okay, so the next question I often get asked is, okay, I've recorded this, what do I do with it? So what we do is we just do a file, we do an export audio, and then you can already see it's in the folder. We have our episode audio, and then we have all the people, and then I would just export mine. We do it as a wave, and we do an encoding of signed 24-bit PCM. What does that mean? Okay, this is where we're going to get slightly technical, not too technical. I'm going to try and be brief with it and just kind of give you a little quick glance into what all this means. For background on me, I have a couple of degrees, one of which is actually in audio engineering and music technology and stuff like that. So audio engineering and all of this is something I care about. I'm also computer science, hence the Coding Fix podcast. So I just kind of rewinded it a little bit so you can actually see that this is the audio we're working with. And so let's take a step back. Down here in the bottom left, we have what they call the project rate in hertz, or we might actually more commonly refer to it as sample rate. So if you were to Google sample rate, everything I'm about to talk about would have tons and tons of articles written about it. If I click this button, you'll see there's a whole bunch of numbers to choose from. What do those numbers mean? Why would you pick what we use, which is 44,100 instead of 48,000 or 96,000? You know, like, what do those actually mean? Lesson time. We won't dive too deep, but we'll at least kind of get a quick introduction into what this means. So this is a visual representation of a sine wave. If you know audio, or if you don't know audio, it's basically our easy way of looking at something and knowing more or less what it sounds like. So if I were to come into Cubase, like you see all these like jaggies and stuff like that, if I zoom in, if we get close enough, they start to look like this, which is getting closer and closer to the sine wave that we were talking about. Everything can actually be broken down into sine waves when it comes to computer audio. But for this example, I'm just using one, I'm not labeling it. I'm not saying what's on the x-axis, what's on the y-axis, or like giving it units or anything like that and breaking it up. This, for the sake of argument, let's say the window we're looking at here from here to here is taking up 1 second. That is what our x-axis is. And then our y-axis is basically how loud it is. So up here and down here, and then 0 is how, if you think about a speaker moving, 0 is when it's resting in the middle, down here is when it's pulling in, up here is when it's pushing out, or it can be inverted depending on how you think about the phase. Doesn't matter. That's all that is. And that's the same way speakers work, actually the same way microphone work. And if we look back in our history, when it comes to analog recordings, the first ways that we did it was we basically had a record, and then we hooked a microphone up to it, and on the record, it would etch everything in there with a needle. And it would basically be responding to the air, the movements of the air, and what the microphone was transmitting, and it gave us an analog signal, which was pretty much one-to-one with what we were hearing. And then we moved into the 70s and 80s and so on with electronic boards and mixing boards and stuff like that, where electronics are still able to represent these waveforms pretty much true to nature. Same kind of concept. But when we got to computers don't work the same way, because like, let's use even this image as an example. I'm going to zoom in. Like right now, it looks nice and smooth. We can tell that's a sine wave. But if I zoom in, it is not that smooth. It is made up of chunks. It is made up of bits and bytes, and the computer is doing its best job representing that in a way that we can actually see as an image. But if we zoom far enough out, it looks smooth. Zoom in, looks jaggy. And that's just how computers work. It doesn't have smooth lines. It works in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. increments. That's all it knows. It doesn't really know our natural world. So that means when we're trying to represent audio, we need to figure out how frequently we're kind of, the computer is reaching out and saying, okay, I'm grabbing the signal at this point. I'm grabbing the signal at this point. I'm grabbing the signal at this point. That is our rate of sampling, our sample rate, or project rate here. But so this is saying that we're sampling it 44,100 times per second. Hertz is a frequency. That's per second. So just to illustrate this, let's say we wanted to take the simplest sample rate we could, which is 1 at the start, 1 at the end, and 1 in the middle. So that's basically a sample rate of 3. And this is what it would look like. Okay, cool. Now let's turn the sine wave off. Does that look like a sine wave? Not really. Let's use a little line tool here. Let's just connect the dots there and there. Yeah, not exactly looking like our sine wave, is it? At all. Okay, so I think that means we need a little bit higher resolution. So I'm going to turn this one off, and let's just grab one in the middle of each of these. So that is this one. Okay, getting closer. Let's just grab this. Oh, that wasn't perfect. Sorry. All right, let's turn the sine wave off. Okay, it's still not quite there, but hey, look, at least we have this now, which is looking a little bit closer to our kind of bump in the bottom versus this one where we didn't even have that. It was just the straight up triangle. All right, let's get rid of those lines and let's just, let's take it one more. Let's go further. Oh, all right. Turn off that sine wave. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. I'm not going to connect the dots, but like, well, here, I'll connect a few of them. Here, here, here. Let's just do it to there. And turn the sine wave back on. So it's not exactly there, but it's a lot closer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep increasing our rate. So just going halfway between each of these. All right, all right. Closer. And then finally, yeah. All right, that's starting to look like a sine wave. So that's what our sample rate is accomplishing for us. And we just want to grab enough signal so that it is representing the audio relatively accurately. And so why are we picking 44,100 instead of 48,000 or 32,000? 44,100 actually comes from rules of nature. And you've probably heard that human hearing only goes up to about 20,000 hertz. That's like the highest we can hear. And as we get older, it goes lower and lower and lower, and we can hear less high frequencies. So it is actually based on that. So 20,000 hertz times 2, because we have a mono track, but if you want to do stereo, so that's 1 in your left ear, 1 in your right ear, then you need to double that. So 20,000 times 2 is 40,000. That's awfully close to 44.1, isn't it? Where does the 4,100 come from? That gets a little bit technical. I'm not going to talk about it too much here. If anyone's interested, reach out. But that's where we get into some kind of advanced concepts known as oversampling and the Nyquist theory. So basically, we're giving ourselves a little bit of overhead here. Like we're having a little bit of headroom that we can work with. Because once we get to the really high stuff, and if stuff tries to go above that, it can actually start to kind of loop back around and sound distorted and muddy, and it's gross. And artifacting is what we call it. So we just give ourselves a little bit of extra headroom so we never run into that. So when it comes to our human hearing range, we're all good. So that is why the industry standard for just straight up audio stuff is generally 44.1, because it's the human range of hearing. So what about 48K? Like I've definitely seen threads on Reddit and podcast forums and stuff like that, and articles saying, oh, no, use 48K. I'm going to say you don't need to. Brief little history lesson. 48K comes from film because film traditionally is recorded at 24 frames per second. 24 times 2 is 48. And 48,000 just lines up really easily with film. So it was all about keeping things in sync with the film. That's the only reason. It's not that big of a difference from 44.1. So maybe if you're syncing up your podcast with film that is on actual film and you're doing it at 24 frames per second, go for it. But 44.1 in most cases is probably going to be completely fine. Okay. So let's kind of just summarize what I just talked about there, because that was quite a bit of information. We do our meetings on Zoom. We record them off of OBS. And then what we do is we bring that into Cubase, and then each of us individually also record all of our own audio, export it like I was doing here, export audio. We export it, I get all of them, and then sync them up in here so that we can just work with everything discreetly in the DAW in Cubase. Okay, so we're getting there. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what happens in here. So first off, I said this wasn't going to be a lesson, but just to illustrate what I was talking about, I am importing the audio from the video file. I say pop and then pull that in. That becomes this track. So something that you might notice, I'm going to pull my track down here, is that my track doesn't have any cuts, but these ones do. Why is that? Well, for one, we do take a lot of notes when we're recording, saying, okay, at this time marker, oops, let's just take that off. That's a loop. I'm going to pull up my transport. So at 1 hour, 28 minutes and 43 seconds, oh no, we know Pat's cat slammed into the microphone and knocked over his whole computer. Oh, that sounds terrible. I'm just going to remove that. So that's what some of these cuts are from, and that's what this one actually was. But a lot of them actually are because the audio does gradually get out of sync over time, which is why mine does not have cuts, because I also record this one from our Zoom audio directly on the same computer as this one, which is recording my individual audio. My computer, my CPU, everything is in sync with itself, but other people's computers don't work exactly 100% the same. It might be 99.99% the same, but it's not 100%. And because our podcast is long, we are not kind of a shorter interview-based podcast. We're just starting recording, having a full conversation over a broad number of topics, and then we're ending recording, which usually 2 or 3 hours. This one was, almost 3 hours. These sample rates, these things, like digital audio works really well. Well, for one, if it's all on the same computer, that works great. But when you're across multiple computers, it'll stay in sync for 5, 10, 20 minutes, depending on how close your computers are. But after that, you start to lose a little bit of sync, because if it loses 10 samples every second, remember, sample rate, if Pat's computer loses 10 samples every second or whatever, that adds up and it's cumulative. So that by the time we're at 2 hours, it might have lost several thousand samples, which means it's now out of sync from this track. So that's what these cuts are for. And if you do this method, if you do this method, anticipate that you'll have to do the same thing I'm doing. It just involves having a guide track and looking and seeing like, okay, yeah, that lines up. And like, even if I were to come to like this bad boy, we would probably see that these aren't so lined up anymore. That's not a great one. Here, this looks like where Pat's starting. So you can see this is our guide track and Pat is a little bit ahead. So, or technically a little bit after, but, and I having done this for a few years now, I know that Pat's goes that way. I know that Allison's tends to go ahead the other way, and then Andre's also goes ahead, his goes back, etc. So you just kind of get used to it, and it's just a matter of kind of, with relative frequency, checking when things start to sound out of sync, just kind of resyncing them. Here, let me just play you exactly what that sounds like. Let's go to the one I just kind of used as an example, which I believe was this one. It is. So I'm going to select Pat. I'm going to select the video, and sorry, I'm just going to make double sure. Yeah, those are out of sync. So it should sound like he has a bit of an echo.
And it's not incredible, but I like the way the characters look in it more than.
So yeah, now if I were to sync those up, I'm just going to do a very rough sync. It's not quite there. Let's say there. Now it should sound a lot closer.
And it's not incredible, but I like the way the characters look in it more than Team Fortress. So
yeah,
wow.
So that is what we're doing with the syncing, is just making sure that it sounds, relatively close, because ultimately we are not sending through this guide track with everything. That is why by default it is muted. So no one will actually have that context. It just makes sure that people aren't accidentally talking over each other and stuff like that. Okay. So that's a lot of information. I want to talk about one more thing, and that is just kind of the individual things we do to every track to make them sound a little bit better. And that comes to here, which is our other view. And if I were to see, you can see I have Alex myself selected. That's because I have myself selected. Pat is now selecting Pat, and etc. If I went down to Andre, it is selecting Andre. So it is all directly linked, and these are our levels. So if I press play.
Well, next news story.
So you can see Andre speaking, that is his volume. If I were to pull it all the way down, you can't hear him.
Speaking of Tencent.
Yeah, so there we go. These ones are all just our audio, and then the things that make it sound real nice, that is up here. So for example, I'm going to use myself. I won't show off myself because it'll get confusing hearing both of me, but this is an equalizer, which is basically saying across a frequency range, I'm boosting here, I'm cutting here, and stuff like that. If I go to Allison, you are here, and she has a lot more on hers, and that is because her room tends to be really noisy. Right around here, I don't know if it's a fridge or a ceiling fan or something. Rather than just dealing with it, what we do is we just kind of scoop it right here and say, okay, no, that sounds really bad. We'll just get rid of the room noise. And that's just a way to make things sound better. We also use things like gates. Actually, no, let me show it off here. It'll be a little easier to show you. Oh, this is on my other screen. Give me a moment to pull it over. So this is a tool that we use called Nectar, and I recommend Nectar to anyone who wants to do a podcast because Nectar is just a godsend. Also, if you're an audio engineer and you're interested in doing anything with vocals, Nectar is going to be your friend. So I've selected Pat's track. I'm just going to grab him again in case we want to show anything. So he has an equalizer here. I'm using the EQ in here just rather than giving him his own discrete one, because this just collects a whole bunch of tools and puts it in one place. So we have a compressor, equalizer, compressor, gate, de-esser, saturation. We're not using this, and we're not doing any pitch correction or auto-tuning to them. So we don't care about that. What we do care about, equalizer, that's kind of what I was talking about, cutting and boosting certain frequencies. Compressor is a little bit more complicated, but essentially if you were to look at our signal, like see here how these peaks right here, these peaks are higher than the rest of them. What it is saying is we're just going to kind of squish those down so they're all roughly the same, which will give us the ability to bring everything up a little bit louder because now everything is uniform and we don't have to worry about peaks kind of blowing people's ears out. So what this is saying is, okay, below it, or if this is the signal level, as it says, the decibel level at which we are looking for in order to kick the compressor off. So if I were to just start Pat's track, I'm going to be adjusting this. Just keep an eye on this compressor and watch the red lines.
Path of X style, skill tree. Yeah. It's wild. It's not as big as.
So you can see that when I had it low there, it was going quite a bit. If I go to high.
Not as big as Path of Exile, but it's like.
It doesn't really kick in as much. That's because I'm not hitting the threshold. I imagine if I were to go over here, I think it was at 17 or somewhere around that. I can't remember. I'm not going to save this afterwards so I don't lose my settings. Haha. But it should kick in here, probably.
Playing Odyssey.
There you go. So that just brought the volume down. Instead of us having to go through here and just like manually adjust volume and be like, oh, this one was loud, we have to bring this down. Oh, no. It saves us the manual step, and it's just getting a computer to do it for us, basically. So that's what a compressor does. It's great. A gate is also extremely useful. So it also uses a signal. You see here we have minus 16.9. Here we have minus 31.6. Remember, with decibels, 31.6 is not higher. It is actually lower because we start at 0. Like if I move this up here, that is 0. And then we're going below that. So 31.6, we're saying anything below 31.6 does not show up. So like you can see here, we have a little bump. That actually might be above, we'll see. But okay, let's actually set our gate a little higher, and then we shouldn't hear this at all. Okay, well, I have set that wrong. That's fine. Doesn't matter. What all it's saying is that anything below that will get cut out. Is this going to do it? Whatever. Doesn't matter. What a gate is doing is it's just getting rid of anything below there. So if we have background noise, it's just cut out. Again, it's getting the computer to do our work for us. De-esser. I'm gonna blame that one on the fact that I've had to switch all my audio settings to get this to record for the video. Whatever. De-esser. So de-essers are actually really, 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 really super important for a podcast, especially for your listener, because the sounds of S's can be really grating and just kind of irritating to listen to if you have lots of them. And the sound of that is called sibilance, which it's ironic that sibilance has that sound in it lots of times. Anyways, sibilance is at a predictable frequency, and we can kind of bring that down just by, it's basically a compressor, but is working specifically at that frequency. So it gets less irritating for our listeners. So de-esser is very important. And saturation just makes it sound warm and fuzzy. I'm not going to get too deep into it. It's similar to if you had something recorded on tape and it has that just kind of warm tape sound. That's kind of what it's emulating. Okay, so that's some of the big tools we use for our individuals. Here is just another gate. This is just increasing gain. And then what you'll see over here is we have a verb. And what that is reverb. And what reverb is to make it sound like all of us are in the same room. In this case, I'm using a very fancy reverb because I do professional audio stuff, and this is called Altiverb. You do not need this. You do not need Altiverb. You can use something called Valhalla, which I think is free. I'd have to look into that again. Sorry, I didn't research that beforehand. But basically, it just makes us sound like we're all in the same room. So if I were to play, I'm not soloed. What I'm going to do is it's actually very subtle with how it is right now, but I'll turn it up so that you can kind of hear what I mean. Oh, I am still soloed.
It makes it not so like tiresome to like go to all these new areas and like, oh, well.
So it's a subtle, like if I have it all the way up, it's not subtle, but down here, it's pretty subtle. It makes it sound like we're actually in the same room. And if we wanted to be really crazy, like think about if you've ever been in a big room like a church or your bathroom, singing in your bathroom. That is an option here. We have bathrooms. But if you're in a church, in a cathedral, I'm just going to pick some random thing. Sure, this chapel. We are now in there. If you were to clap your hands, clap. I'm not going to do that because it'd be really loud for you. And the sounds reverberate off the walls. They echo off the walls. That is reverberation. So let's make it sound like we're in a chapel.
Oh, well, I'm level like 120, but this zone's like level 50, but it still feels like.
So, yeah, we're not going to use that, but that's just to illustrate the point that it makes us sound like we're in the same room. And it's just a nice little effect, especially if you're a remote podcast like we are. One last thing we do is we have, I'm not going to explain the routing, but this is all of our voices put together. And what we do is we throw it through an instance of what is called Ozone. And it just, remember how we were talking about the EQs and the compressors and all that? This is another one of those. This one is what is called a multi-band compressor. So we're compressing, again, squishing our signal, but at very specific frequencies. So that way we can just kind of make sure that for optimizing for a podcast, it sounds best. And then lastly, we have this, which is going to be very important for a lot of you. Is very similar to a compressor, but it is called a limiter. These guys call it a maximizer, but it is technically a limiter. Like if I were to search for something to put in here and I search for limit, we have a brick wall limiter, we have a vintage limiter, L1 limiter, blah, blah, blah limiters. But they call it a maximizer, whatever, same thing. It is very much like our compressor, but kind of working the other way and saying, okay, we want to make sure that we get it louder, and also that it never exceeds the ceiling. So it's never distorting. It's never getting too loud. So this will be a way to kind of ensure that your audio is loud, not too loud, and it's never distorting. So that is one of the last ones that we use that is very important. And again, you can get free versions of all these plugins. I use paid versions because I've been doing this for many years and it sounds nice. But you can get away with what is in Reaper, no problemo. All right, so that's basically it. The one last thing I would talk about is, okay, you've mixed everything. We've set our ranges. So like we have our music here. So blah, blah, blah.
Hello and welcome.
I forgot that the cathedral was still on. But yeah, so we have our music and we're saying, okay, we're going to start our recording here and we're ending our recording here. Or over here if you so wanted, because it's a longer one, but we're just going to add it here. Okay, this is the end of our recording. You need to export that bad boy. So, file, export, audio mixdown. We have our episode. It's not this, but we are exporting it. And okay, what do we do with that? Okay, we remember how we were saving out of Audacity in Wave at 44.1 and 24-bit PCM, which I didn't actually explain. Sorry about that. 24-bit, let me go back. 24-bit PCM, sample rate is this way. 24-bit PCM is this way. It is what we call bit depth, and it is how loud everything is. Because if I turn these off and we just go to our sine wave, this frequency is our X, right? And the loudness is actually our Y. If I squish this down, our frequency hasn't changed. It's just a lot quieter. So what bit depth is saying is if it was like a bit depth of 1, it would basically be on or off. So it would just sound like buzzing. But a bit depth of 4 would just give us like a little bit more. But a bit depth, the higher the bit depth, the more resolution you have, meaning the more, the louder your louds are, the quieter your quiets are. And that's all bit depth is. So we use a bit depth of 24-bit. Again, if I were to do an export audio, we do it at 24-bit. However, that is because we want our audio that we're mixing to sound as good as possible, because we want our source audio to be just spectacular, fantastic, wonderful, crisp, and clean. But what we export doesn't need to be quite that clean. So we actually export it down to MPEG, because that will give you the best balance of file size to audio quality, because we don't need any bit rate higher than 92 kilobits per second. I'm not going to talk about what that means, but trust me, you don't need any more than that for just spoken word. If you are doing an audio listening podcast, sure, you can still use MPEG, maybe put it up to like 190, 192, somewhere around there. But we go lower because it's just our voices. We don't need that much fidelity. I'm not going to get into the technical aspects, but trust me, MPEG is worth it. If you were to save this file as a wave, this file would be like 700 megabytes, which for people who are downloading your podcast or listening to it over data, that's not great. But this 750 megabyte podcast, if I do it at 92-bit in mono, means that, like here, sorry, we have a mono down mix. That means this file is going to be like 50 megabytes, 60, 70, somewhere in that range. It's much, much, much more manageable, and it still sounds fine. And because we're starting with the highest quality stuff, we're just ensuring that when we bring it down to the lower quality, it sounds as good as it can. And that's ultimately really important. Okay, so that is basically a summary of how we do it. So, we record in Zoom. We record the audio from the video. We pull that into here. We record all of our individual stuff. We pull those into here, which show up here. We do every bit of editing we need. We clip out stuff we don't want. We make sure they're all synced. And then once they're all synced, we have a template set up for all of our effects, our equalizers and our gates and our reverbs and et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately we export that audio. And all the while we're using the best microphones we have available to us for what's reasonable within your budget. And that's basically it. Of course, all of these can get way more technical if anybody wants. Like, you'll note that I do have volume automation here for some stuff, and there are other tracks where I do that. I have some stuff set up for guests if and when we have them, and you do some other stuff for them that you don't necessarily do for us because it's, case by case. But that basically brings us to the end of these tips, these kind of overview and this how to get the best audio out of your podcast kind of tutorial. If you do end up having more questions for me, please feel free to send me a message. I'll be posting this onto Reddit, so you can reply to that thread. You can reply to the video itself. You can send an email to either gaming or coding@fyx.space, gaming@fix.space, or coding@fix.space, and I will check those. And yeah, I'm happy to get way more in depth with any of this if anybody wants. All right. Thanks for your time. Have a great day, and talk to you again soon.